Creating games is a complicated profession. We asked a senior game designer for advice on how to be successful doing it and heard this.
I mean, ultimately, never give up. Like, if you have an idea, if you're passionate about it, then you should, like I say, like always move forward. You have to be willing to get in on the ground floor, try to find a little studio, try to find some people that of like mind, and just create something.
That's Salim Grant, and our conversation draws on his experience in games design for games like Vanguard, EverQuest 2, Neverwinter, and ranges from what a game designer is, how they work, and how creating games is evolving. Let's get into it.
This is Behind the Games from NewOverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
From the New Overlords Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Velamek.
And from the Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
And today, we're joined by senior games designer Salim Grant. Salim, hello.
Hello.
So for those listening and watching, why don't you give, I know some of your background. We've talked a little bit. I've seen some of the things you've done, but why don't you introduce yourself and talk about what some of the things you've done and what you're doing now?
Well, like you said, I'm a senior game designer, but it started that way. I started way long ago working at Sony Entertainment as a tech support guy and a GM, QA guy. And then eventually I got a chance to be a game designer on some older games, Star Wars Galaxies, EverQuest, and transitioned over to working on a game you might have heard of, Vanguard, Saga of Heroes, short here. And then, ended up back on EverQuest 2, worked on Free Realms, and throughout my career I've been a designer, creative director, senior designer, about to go into a role of senior combat designer. So I've kind of gone all over the place doing a variety of things over my past almost 20 years in industry.
We are so excited to have you as one of the first guests here as we talk to someone in the industry, both from the perspective of the depth of experience you have across all of those, the kind of role you have, which is a little bit more unique, and we'll get into that in a second, but those games, those games that you worked on.
That's quite the pedigree, yes.
are great, and I'm a big fan of all of them. I played Star Wars Galaxies a whole bunch. I played EverQuest. I played Vanguard quite a bit, and that was groundbreaking at the time, and really cemented my desire to do more and more and be in MMOs for my personal life for forever. The expansiveness of that game was just amazing, and both of the depth of the systems and the breadth of the world that was presented. So it's exciting stuff.
Very
so
fun
thank
to
you
work.
for all of that.
I was just doing a job. There's other people responsible for that game, but it was definitely like a significant part of my career, both personally and professionally. A lot of interesting things happened working on that.
Yeah, they did. So people can understand a little bit about what a game designer does and some of the kinds of parts of your job. I think it's a little underappreciated piece of the world. Everybody thinks about coders, and we'll talk to some coders. And I've been a coder, not so much in games, although I have written a game or two back in my Commodore 64 days. But yeah, why don't you describe what a game designer is, and we can talk about that for just a bit.
It is kind of hard to very specifically define it. We tend to be the people who come up with the general ideas for gameplay and story and things like that, and how they mix together. Of course, with sub-specialties within game design, but generally we try to define and work within whatever box the game is supposed to be, and just create experiences. And those experiences obviously involve, what something might look like, what it might sound like, how the player interacts with it, potential for what we want the UI to look like, things like that. We kind of drive the boat in that regard. The triangle of art, sound, and programming.
Is it like what you want the player to be inspired to do when they walk into an area?
I mean, visual storytelling, things like that, are a part of kind of how you would design something if you're doing some level design or something like that, which level design arguably is art first, design second, or designs first, art second, depending on the studio and type of game. Um, but designers kind of run the gamut. Um, we do all kinds of stuff, which is um, interesting and fun. Can be very frustrating, but generally, a feature is, you know, if you want to talk to someone who might know something about feature, you're going to probably talk to a designer first. At least it's a good place to go first because they're going to know something about it.
Right.
Because in the end, it is them. It's the gameplay, which should be king, is dictating all the other stuff.
Yeah, and the approach to the fun. So
Yeah.
when you get into a game, the things that you do, the path that you're set on, the why you're being driven from point to point within the game, the puzzles you need to solve, the feeling that you get when you're in each of those areas, that's all design. There's
Yeah. And not to take it away, it's like that is all design, like you say, but the the core of that may be defined by a designer, but generally, in order to get like a solid product or a solid experience, it's everyone who's invested in it is kind of contributing to that design.
sure,
Um,
that
you know,
makes sense.
we're just saying, hey, let's go this way, and bringing the rest of the party with us. I want to make sure that they're all involved in it and in a part of the decision making process because you get an artist on board with the gameplay and then they're like super inspired to do something extra or modify it in some way that works really well with the gameplay. And the same for sound and obviously working hand in hand with the programmer, which in some cases a programmer is part designer as well. Um, that ends up basically fleshing out the design fully, whereas we just kind of like lit the spark.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense, especially in the smaller indie or even the
Oh, for
solo
sure.
developer. They're
Yeah,
they're going to be developer designer. As you
many
get into the
hats.
bigger studios in the places that you've worked, where you have
Yeah,
teams of many people, that
yeah.
all of those different roles coming together. Would you say that the designer sort of sits in the middle, or and sort of does some of that coordination and orchestration between the different, like the coders and the testers and the sound design and art?
I mean, ultimately, there's always a producer involved as a part of the team, and that's
Okay,
their role is that. But in my personal career, I've had to basically do that in many ways, just because I'm kind of move forward guy. We get a design going. I want to get, I want to break ground. I want to move forward. I want to see what we can do. I want to, if there's any R&D involved, I want to get on that and figure out what's going to be difficult, what's going to be have to change based on the core design. Obviously working within the goals of the design, but generally a producer is involved with that. But yeah, I've like I said, I worked on some old games, and it was kind of Wild West back then. And
sure.
if you weren't a go getter, or somebody who just kind of can, grab the bull by the balls, I think that's the expression. Um, then you might get left behind, or you might end up just not working on something that you want to work on. Which I've had that happen to me as well, but you just make the best out of the situation and you move forward.
So tell me about a little bit of the day in the life. You get up. Do you sit down at a desk and start writing writing documents? Do you have to like have meetings and talk to people and make sure that they're doing their part before, so you can get input? And so what does sort of that day in the life look like?
Depending on the phase that you're in, if you're like just starting up, a new, let's say it's a DLC or a module or something like that. If it's a live game, usually it's you just figure out what the goal is. You want to release this type of feature, um, and then probably sit down and noodle over some ideas. Write up something real quick, basic proposal, um, pitch, pitch it to whoever might be working on it with me. Um, then go over it back and forth, brainstorm a little bit, and then just finalize something and then get it approved. And at that point, once it's approved, you just kind of start working on it, whichever is best for that particular feature. If it's a dungeon, then maybe you start getting the layout and stuff worked out, what kind of props you want in it, just based on the theme. Make sure there's some good visual guidance there for the artists. If there's anything special within the feature, make sure that you're talking to the programmer, get them on board for sure. This is kind of an extension of the brainstorming session where you flesh out more of the details that were in your more detailed design doc. But for me, if once I'm past all that, I just kind of get up and just go. I will pop on in the morning, report in with my team, and just whatever I was working on, I'll just move forward on it and get going. So it could be writing a quest, that could be implementing a boss encounter, placing base population, could be any of that stuff. It could be creating some crafting recipes, creating some items. There's just like a lot of things that I have had to wake up and do, or continue through the day because I hadn't slept and do as a part of my daily routine. So I don't really have like a specific one. I have like a specific personal routine I do every morning, but otherwise work is just whatever I need to do. I'm just like grab it and start moving.
Yeah,
It
excellent.
sounds like it's a pretty healthy mix of creative and technical. Like you have to have a lot of both to be successful at what you do.
I think, like I said before, there's a bunch of subspecialties. Back in the day, there was a high respect for the design writer, someone who just writes. And as the industry has evolved, it's become less and less of a thing. But it is still a specialty that is super valuable. Certainly, in my opinion, it is. And that person may be less technical and certainly more creative by far. They lean way more on that side because they would be the owners of the story. They'd be the owners of the theme. They would help define, if I'm working on a dungeon and, I need some guidance on theme, what might look right, or an artist working on a dungeon with me, they might go to the writer, the designer who's focused on writing or story, and get some better insight into whether we're going in the right direction or not. So it definitely mixes, and obviously, like I am just kind of a general designer, and that's just happened through experience. Most of my work has been systems work, which is more technical, but you definitely get people who are low level technical. They're closer to coders as systems designers. People who are hardcore balance tuners and things like that. Very low level mathematics people, which I certainly am not. I enjoy math, but my brain does not work at that level, unfortunately. It is very broad. I would say I'm just kind of in the middle. It's like making games. So whatever someone gives me, I'm gonna do the best I can with it. If I need help, I'm gonna get some help, and that'll just make me better in the end.
That, especially on the bigger teams, that willingness to go off and get people to collaborate and do work on extra pieces of it, or pick up a part of the process that they're a specialist in, I think makes a ton of sense, and that's the only way that that's going to work.
Yeah.
And we hear about these AAA studios with so many people as part of the process, and compare that to our mental model of a game or a business where you'd think, well, this should only take 3 people. There, you got a coder, you got an artist, and why don't they just put a game together? Now, there's, as you said, there might be someone whose job is just living in spreadsheets all day, putting together numbers for combat balance, and doing all of that data and analytics on that underlying code of the system. Great, we need that person. Let's pull that person in when we need them.
Yep.
But yeah, probably depending on the side of the team, you might have to do more of that as a game designer. So it sounds like like writing documents is a piece of it. Sketching things out. Do you do sketching too yourself? Are you
I'm not an artist per se, but yeah, I mean diagrams and stuff like that. I use a lot of squares, circles, and starbursts to diagram out a
Awesome.
boss fight and the various phases of it. Which usually I just use Google Draw now. It's pretty simple to get the basic general diagrams in. So yeah, I mean, if I can sketch, I've actually my last dungeon design actually had like a very particular idea I had for this kind of elevator flower concept that you would be fighting on as it was going down, and I could like really nail or find the visuals that were good. So I asked my wife to sketch something for me, and I used that in the document. Um, so
Resourceful.
yeah, I mean, I'm actually lucky enough that I have a wife who loves to draw, and teaches English and stuff like that, so she can also help me in my writing
excellent.
when I'm having some
That's
issues.
great.
But
So
it's also a good, it's something that's kind of weird, at least with me, is that when I write a design document, I will let my wife edit it. And as a part of that, it's me seeing if she can actually understand the design, which helps,
right.
because relative to me, she's a layman in that regard. So she's the player to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if she can understand what I'm writing, then, oh, well, sure, that means that other people on the team or professionals would understand it. So it's a good, like, litmus test as well in that regard. So I get kind of lucky and when it comes to that stuff.
I think that's a pro tip for anyone out there in any job. Getting feedback, getting outside eyes looking at what you've done to ensure that the idea is sound, that you're communicating it effectively. It's just so important and underutilized by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you having someone there to bounce ideas off of locally, and then having the rest of your team then is the next level, and then it goes beyond that, I'm sure, to play testers and all of that kind of thing. There's so many levels of that kind of feedback and review, and that's positive. That's good. So that's really interesting to hear. What kind of challenges? What would you say are the biggest challenges to a game designer that you need to deal with, or that you're dealing with now, or that you've dealt with being potentially you're probably working remote for a lot of the last year or 2 years?
I think certainly fairly recently, remote is a challenge for a creative person, especially depending on personality. If you're fairly introverted and you don't really like to like reach out to people, you could be like super creative, but obviously like you're also very subjective. You can't be objective when it comes to what you're doing. So other people being involved is important. In an office environment, you're going to get that somehow, some way.
Whether you want it or not.
Yeah, like something is going to happen, but you're also going to have kind of relationships within the office, other professionals that you can just go to their desk or something like that. With the remote environment, which I thought this wouldn't be this way, but with the remote environment, it actually seems like it's more difficult for people to communicate, which I find very odd. When you can just, if you were a type of person who was afraid to like go to the desk of someone who has a bigger personality or is kind of gruff or something, words that have been applied to me, in the sense of
did you say words that have been applied to you?
Yes.
That's not fair. You seem like the easiest person to talk to I could imagine.
Yeah.
But
you seem very approachable.
Maybe it's more the depth of experience and wisdom. Maybe it's it's like going to going to that guru that people would be reluctant to without having their own ideas already set.
I think generally people can gravitate to me in an office because I go to people a bunch. Like I'm not afraid, and I kind of build relationships intentionally because I'll be at my desk, heads down, really focused on something, and I get my normal face, which doesn't necessarily look happy or sad, and people are afraid to approach me if they don't know me. So I try to like reach out as a thing, and then I just give them the award-winning smile, and they're good to go. But in the case of someone who just isn't willing to do that, um, uh, you know in the office environment, or remote wise, I thought that that would fix that because I don't have to like deal with that like in person like intimidation,
Right.
um, for lack of a better term. But it just, man, it has not
In
turned
some
into
ways,
that.
it's more intimidating because you don't know what the other person's doing.
Yeah,
Maybe you are interrupting.
and
Mhm.
also hours worked. Like I get up at 5 a.m. Our core hours where I currently am, are 9:30 or 10:30 to 5, and I'm up at 5 in the morning, and I generally work till about 6:30 in the evening, and I people will actually like they're not sure when to ping me sometimes. There are people who definitely know, because I will ping them at like 6 in the morning, and they're like still sleeping. Um, but it's a Teams message, so I can just like wait for them to
Right.
respond.
Right.
But there are people who have like legitimately not spoken to me because they just assume that I'm super busy and they don't want to disturb me. So it's all done out of like respect.
Sure.
Um, but in the office situation, that just wouldn't be a thing. Like you could see me, you could,
Right.
see me walking around, you see me in the break room or something like that.
Yeah.
You could just be like, hey, let's go to lunch or something. Like it's more casual and it's easier to approach, which I thought it would work the opposite way that it has so far. But it is a challenge. When you want to be creative, it's easier to grab some people in a room with a whiteboard and just go to town.
Right.
Um,
It is.
on Teams, it is, or just remote, it's not. Some people have their cameras on, some people have their cameras off. There's no like consistency there. People, it's harder to control when people are like talking over each other and things like that. It can be harder to control a meeting unless you're like forcing some stuff through whatever app you're using. So it definitely has been somewhat challenging, and I think that as a result, some things have kind of gotten through that other people didn't realize were happening, which that still happened in an office environment because
Sure. Sure.
you present a big idea and you go through all the little parts of it, and then it just gets approved. But if some things get missed, and then things go done, people are like, wait, what the heck? Um, but
Yeah.
uh, but
Yeah.
in an office environment, less likely than seemingly in Teams or in remote because I keep saying Teams because that's what I'm using right now. Um,
It-
but I don't want to blame
yeah.
Microsoft for remote not being the
No,
best
no.
pilot.
And it's not the tool, it's the process. And you mentioned you said a word in there, sort of forcing it. In some ways, I think it's possible to get pretty close to the collaborative environment,
Yeah,
but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I did some of this in professional environments, especially at the start of the pandemic. In order to make it work, you need to force a whole bunch of things. You need to say cameras need to be on all the time. You need to
yeah,
say here's the amount of time. It might seem boring, but we're going to all get in a daily stand up and
yeah,
talk for and enforce those kinds of things for one, and for two, especially with more studios going fully remote. And I talked to a couple when I was at PAX a couple of weeks ago. Fully remote studio that's from the ground up. These smaller indie studios,
yeah,
they've never had an office. I think things like pair programming, you can
yeah,
do even that kind of thing, but you then need to have two people with their cameras on all day, video conferenced with each other, sharing screens, working together. And then if you force it, if you do it that way, and I've seen even physical office setups where you've got like a big screen next to you and it
yeah,
looks like you're just sitting right next to someone. That can work, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And if you don't take those steps, then yeah, people are just they're gonna sit in their own little box. They're gonna do their work, and things tend to get really comfortable in doing that. But then
yeah,
those integration points, those points where things come together, then you'll notice the breakdown.
yeah,
Designs don't fit, code doesn't match,
yeah.
bugs are introduced, all of that kind of thing. I think it'd be crazy.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, in that situation you're describing, there's also like a level of anxiety that would be applied to that if someone's constantly looking at my screen. But again, it is a, you know, potentially, certainly programming, a better way to ensure that stuff that's getting through is quality, and not bug ridden.
Yeah.
For me, it is difficult, because I am kind of that, walk around, talk to people guy. I like getting to know people. I like getting to know people personally. Like when I know on a team, that team is an extension of my family in a lot of ways. I'm going to war with them. We're in the trenches together. We're implementing. We're making stuff fun. And of course, the war is to try to deliver fun to our players. So for me, I have to view it that way. It helps me be more passionate about what I'm doing and about the people around me. It definitely helps me involve them more. Because like I said, I would get my head down. I'll just be going. But if there's moments like, oh man, someone would really like this. Let me show it. Let me show it to them. Or I need some help with this. I want to make sure this looks really cool. I want to represent such animation really well. So that type of stuff in an office situation is easy because I grab them, bring them over my desk or whatever.
Right.
On Teams, I said it again. On Teams, it's and again, wow, remote. It is more difficult. But I think over time you'll get used to it. You just lose that personal touch. So hopefully, as studios become fully remote, or more studios become fully remote, or open to full remote people, they will have like a cadence of, okay, we're going to have like a get together. Let's have a 1 week, every quarter or something like that, where we just get everyone in studio together. We get face to face. We talk about some stuff. Maybe there's a brainstorming event where we just talk about ideas for games, and then we just do some fun stuff in a park or whatever it may be. Just to make sure that you're getting that face time with other people.
Yeah, I think that's insightful. I think that's really the way you got to set it up and think about it. And who knows, 5-10 years from now, maybe we'll all be in augmented reality headsets for our day job, and we'll have holograms of our coworkers next to us in the metaverse.
Yes, we will be.
Okay.
All have our headsets on, or those new. The new Vive glasses I saw the other day. Yeah, we'll have those on.
And the Magic Leap has got their new version out. Those are pretty crazy looking. They look kind of steampunkish. Yeah. I would wear them. I'll try that.
Sure.
Anything else in the sort of the challenges section that we should?
As far as like just general design challenges. Sometimes, for me, sometimes it's hard to know when to stop, which is, just understanding things like scope. And this is where production is important. And certainly for me, I work a lot. But that's just a passion thing. That's a drive for me. And it has definitely resulted in some interesting interactions in my career, just through sleep deprivation and things like that. I've actually been banned from my workplace for 3 days because I had basically just not gone home for about a month.
Really? Sleeping under the desk, working nonstop.
Funny enough, I mean that particular situation helped me quit smoking cold turkey after 10 years. Was working so much. I was working so much on Vanguard that I was out late one night and I went out, smoke a cigarette. There's nobody else around. I'm just, sitting out there smoking. I smoked, I think, like 3 cigarettes. And I looked at the time and realized I had been out there for like half an hour. And I told myself, if I didn't smoke, I could work more. And I stopped smoking.
That's a pretty dramatic story.
That is when you're working so much, you quit another addiction to keep up your work addiction.
Yeah,
that is dramatic.
I mean, I don't want to say anything bad. Like, I loved working on Vanguard for sure. It's like one of my favorite development experiences because there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened working on Vanguard, good and bad. And out of it, I legitimately from that day, I did not smoke another cigarette. And I just kept working. and I'm better off for it.
Yeah, well, as long as then you also fix the other part, which was actually like sleeping at least
of
once
course.
every 2 days.
Yeah, that has been resolved. My children and my wife have helped me fix that situation a little
Excellent.
bit. I still don't sleep a whole lot, but
Seema, why don't you kick off the next section? Talk a little about inspirations.
So we were thinking about this too. Like, what inspires you to create new things, or as you create, is it things that you see in the world, other games you've played, books you've read, TV and movies?
it's really a mix of all of that. I love the challenge of I'm a fan of multiple genres of video games. I'm a big RPG guy, but I love playing anything that looks fun, especially with the current state of how many games come out. There's always something that's popping up on Steam that seems interesting, and for me, it's always fun. I've been working primarily in MMOs, and it's fun to like look at a game. You look at a Metroidvania or something and see a cool boss fight and say, "Hey, I wonder if I could reproduce that in a 3D space," or just like a cool system. When we need some new idea for an event, and like, hey, like Destiny does this cool thing. I want to see if we can like take that concept and use it in some way, shape, or form. And all that stuff like gets me super excited because it's not necessarily that the actual thing is like the greatest in the world. When it comes to a boss fight, it is probably one of the greatest in the world because it's a fun experience for me. But it's the challenge of actually completing that, figuring it out, that tends to be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
On Vanguard, they asked me to do the Flying Mount quest, which is this big epic quest that like at the time you asked young Salim, hey, we want people to have to do this crazy thing to get their flying mounts. Crazy is a word that I live by, so let's do it. Like the first part of the quest, I figured out how to do like Metal Gear style, like stealth based stuff with question marks and all that stuff to like sneak up onto Griffin's thing and get a feather and stuff like that. And that was fun. I mean, that was like a week of just like R&Ding and messing with the tools and figuring out. But that was like a fun thing to do, and like I was into it because it just was. Every time you succeed at a step in it, you're just like, oh man, okay, now I got that done. Let me get here. Then you get to there, and then something else breaks, and then you go back and try to figure it out. All that kind of back and forth is like really exciting, and I ended up like putting in like a cool little boss fight where you're flying, and like we didn't have like mounted combat or anything like that, so I had to figure that stuff out. So it was like a very like fun thing to do, mainly because like the inspiration for me there was just like, can we do this? Can I figure out this cool way to do this thing different with a world like, with a game like Vanguard, it was like the world's so open and crazy. And we wanted people to be so free. The tool set, I just bent it as best I could. Not saying there weren't some bugs involved there, but
well, sure. Well, as you sort of like bend those tools to your will, there will be challenges, and that's going to be a little bit of the back and forth in trying to get it work out. But I love that idea of come up with something crazy, come up with a vision. You still are constrained, and sometimes the constraints can add additional creativity.
Yeah.
Sometimes you constrain an environment, and the more you constrain it, the more innovation of the concept that can happen as a result.
Sure.
We see this all over the place in software. We're only going to allow 120 characters in a message system. Well, the interesting things can happen. We're only going to allow 7 seconds of video. Well, constrained down to these tight little bundles, and interesting things can happen. We talk to BioWare from time to time. One of the things that their Star Wars: The Old Republic team has is they set aside what they call the Wall of Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they come up with ideas, or these brainstorming sessions, or individuals will have an idea and they'll stick it on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your own wall of crazy, or ideas that you have in your back pocket that you want to implement someday, or that you bring to the table when something comes up?
Like currently my biggest thing, like what I'm working on, is I really want to work on like an endless dungeon concept.
Mm.
I love endless dungeons in general, and
Yeah.
as far as just like a gameplay experience and serving some like an MMO, they can be super valuable. But along with that, just the concept of building this kind of modular, at least internally, this modular setup where you can like plug things in and change stuff on the fly. Because then once it's live, you can get like feedback from the players, and then it's built in a good structure. You can then easily just kind of pivot, change based on player experience. Um, but that's like currently like the big thing that I've been wanting to work on. Um, Otherwise, like really, I think the next step for me really is to just actually sit down and uh, make a game of my own. There is something in the back of my head. Um, there's an old game on Nintendo called Guardian Legend that mixed shoot 'em up with kind of Zelda style um, planet based stuff. And me and Jason,
Yeah.
Simon, he and I
Amazing.
love that game. And for years we've talked about could we just make like a modern day version of this, and we just never have the time. He's certainly always super busy now, and
Right.
I'm always working. But yeah, like I think the next step for me is to probably do something like that. As far as like big crazy ideas, and hopefully someday I get the time to do that because it definitely burns in the back of my head. I want to do that or make like a cool Metroidvania because games like Hollow Knight are just
Yeah.
so wonderful. And I'd love to just actually like go through the process of making something like that. Um, just because like the game like hit me so hard as far as an experience goes. It's hard to beat Hollow Knight as a product, as an experience in general.
As an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing for anyone who's getting into games to consider. There's gameplay and mechanics and what the character or objective is on the screen, but
Mhm.
the experience, putting all of those things together into an experience and thinking about what the player's experience is as they go through it. In my professional life, I did a lot of work with experience, user experience and experience design with studios,
Yeah.
professional studios. And some of it bled over into the consumer space as well. But that discipline of understanding what the vision is for the experience and putting enough of those pieces together to create a brand new experience and what the player should be thinking or feeling and the tone, and trying to add that into a design is really, really hard
Yeah.
and takes a lot.
Yeah.
So I love that the idea of the endless dungeon too. Just going to go back to that for a second. One of the things that fascinates me in emerging technology in general, but game design in particular, is procedurally generated content.
Yeah.
And potentially using more like machine learning and artificial intelligence to shape it around even dynamically what a player might be doing.
Mhm.
I love the big open procedurally generated universes and worlds. I play a lot of No Man's Sky right now. And that idea of billions of planets procedurally generated and everything then that you encounter, the creatures, the ships, all being procedurally generated. For me, there's a lot of replayability that's
Mhm.
associated with that. Same with that kind of that endless dungeon concept. And to add that kind of thing into an MMO, I think is critical. The
Yeah.
replayability, the dynamic content
Yeah.
into an environment that without that kind of dynamic content or player created, player led fun creation, the environment can become stale really quick.
Yeah.
So I love that. I'll play your endless dungeon. Let's go.
It's certainly not an original idea. There's plenty of other MMOs
Right.
that have the concept. I just have wanted to work on one. And at some point I'll get that opportunity, I hope. But yeah, I can agree with dynamic nature of things and procedure generated stuff. I do think that there is a point of exhaustion when it comes to procedure generated or not familiar things. Sometimes people want to be able to predict. There's an element of mastery that is multiple levels, right? I can master my class, I can master, how my abilities interact, I can, master, what gear I put on, making builds and stuff like that. But there's also like mastery of map and stuff like that I think is fairly
True.
important to kind of solidify an experience. So if something's 100% procedurally generated, um, uh, I do think that there's obviously like that is an experience in its own. Like that is a thing that is fun to do. But I do think that the existence of you know of game that's more like effectively on the rails or more defined also
Sure.
is fantastic. You look at a game like Elden Ring. Um,
Right.
Elden Ring has a defined world. It's you play it over and over again, whether you're on New Game Plus or not. Um, I have played many hours of it, and the mastery of the map is a big part of that.
Right.
Uh, so I do think that there's room for both as far as the experiences go. Um, you can definitely have fun in both. And designing for both is just different challenges there.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because sorry to interrupt, Jeff, but you actually were speaking to me when you said that. Because when I hear Jeff say, "Oh, billions of worlds out there to explore," I just go, "Oh." I like some new stuff, but I like the mastery that you're talking about, the familiar, getting to know the nth little thing,
Mhm.
like learning a boss fight, even if it's a solo boss fight, where you know what's going to happen and you do a little bit better than last time.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, with something like Elden Ring, and you learn it as you go, and learning the fight, and
yeah,
learning each encounter, and learning the
yeah,
map and the environment is the game.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So that's I can definitely see the desire and the need for that. So,
yeah.
and
I,
but we're different people.
It's a fine
Yeah,
line.
but I think that there's also, one thing with the industry now, like, back in the day when, one or two games were coming out a month or whatever it was, you could get a game and you could master a game because you had the time to do it. Now with, proliferation of, engines like Unity and Unreal, and just, things like Steam, or
Yeah.
I forget the other Origin, stuff like that. You have the availability of my game to just get out there. Just means that there's a whole lot of games, and there are so many people who have such awesome ideas. Whether it be a mechanical thing, and just that's just an experience you remember, whether the game is good or not, or just a visual styling or whatever. You want to experience all this stuff, but then you get into a game, and then the game wants you to stick around forever and ever and ever. Um,
Right.
and so there isn't like you don't feel like there's an end for some things. There's obviously majority of games definitely have an end, but you get into bigger games and they just kind of grab you. Whereas back in the day, that was just an MMO. Like if you were
Right.
wanting to spend time in a world forever, you just played an MMO, and then you took a break from the MMO to play a game that didn't ask you to do that. And now with like a zillion games coming out every month, you want to play all of them, but then you get in and you're like, oh god, I had to play this for a while.
I know. It's like playing a game becomes a job.
Yes, indeed. But that's why you appreciate the games like Dwarf Romantic and stuff like that. They're just like, hey, it's just kind of a casual game. You just play it and have fun. Um, uh, that type of stuff. There might be a rise of that type of stuff because there's just kind of this like saturation of just every game just involves long periods of time, and you want to play every game, especially if you're a guy like me. I'm actively playing. I think like 4 games now that I'm popping in and out of. Whenever I discover something new, the last game I played pops off, so I try to keep it down to about 4 or 5 games. Um, uh, and so like that last game, I just don't finish, or I come back to it later on, which makes me sad because it's on my list because it's a
Yeah.
game that I'm really enjoying. But of course, the game that I do stick with in that in that rotation, that I know that game is pretty good, at least to me, because I won't put it down, or I always find time to finish it. But yeah, there's just so many games coming out.
Yeah.
I do miss the
And you
days of
and
the
you do
8-hour game.
you want to experience them. You want to experience the world that's been created. You want to have that experience. But I'm I don't finish a lot of games. I start a lot of games and I tend to not finish for the same reason.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
games I live in long term, and those are the
Mhm.
MMOs in particular. And I
Yeah.
play a lot of MMOs. That's the main thing I played, say probably 80%. And then any of even the RPGs that I love, the single player, I tend to not finish just
Yeah.
because a lot of it does get to the point of where they seem to be building in design or mechanics to give you something to grind. And
Yeah.
I'm not fond of grinding in a solo game or an RPG. I'll grind in an MMO because then I can at least show the results of my
Right.
Yeah.
grind to
Yes.
Yeah.
Seema, look at this thing that I spent 80 hours, and like Seema's not
Right.
going to care, but at least
Oh, I
it's-
do care.
But I think there's a place for it, and there are people that just want to live in Elden Ring and
Yeah.
and only play Elden Ring and play it for. So I think building the games. So let's stay on Elden Ring for a second. Building the game because so many people are gamers these days, and the audience is so broad, and the number of hours of gaming that the general population of the planet now plays today is so big. You can pick to make a game for a particular audience.
Yeah.
So I know you have some thoughts on this in terms of Elden Ring and how hard it is. And is it too hard? Is it too hard to make it not accessible even to a broader audience? And is that good or bad? So what would you say to that?
I would say that I applaud From Software. They have an audience and they make games for them, and they are very successful doing that. And they are unapologetic about it. So like Elden Ring is effectively what I would consider a masterpiece. And it's not necessarily that Elden Ring is the best game ever made. Elden Ring is the magnum opus of Miyazaki, and he saw his dream come true, and for him to nail this, like you can tell that this is a passion project. You can tell that he loved what was being created. You can tell the build up, from Demon Souls up to Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro. Like you can tell that like this is all practice for something like Elden Ring. And so like to me it's a masterpiece because I think the execution on his desire, the team's desire, was well done. And so like I applaud the fact that Elden Ring was the same level of challenge. Like I don't like using the word difficult, for certainly when it comes to them, because they're about challenge. Um, uh, um, the whole goal is getting over the challenge and what you get from that. The dopamine, the adrenaline, the rush of beating a boss that has been kicking your butt, is it's hard to reproduce anywhere else. Like so
Right.
so if you're just able to do that super easy in a game over and over and over, then it doesn't mean anything. But when you finally overcome it, if it's been kicking your butt and teaching you, like the big thing there is that one other thing about Souls like games, is that generally you should be in a situation where if you fail, when you reassess, you should be able to say, okay, well, that was my fault, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. Generally, that should be a thing. Like I should have dodged here, or I dodged too early. Like in all those moments, you're actually learning.
Sure.
And so you're kind of mentally upgrading. But if that doesn't happen, then there's probably something wrong there. But generally, I mean, when it comes to Elden Ring, like the challenge is solid. And I'm not sure if I told you guys this, but I told other people that it is always interesting to look at the type of mods that come out for a game. And of course, the most common mod for Elden Ring is easy mode, which is funny, because it just kind of screams to your question about are they annexing people? No, they're not, because Elden Ring is so popular and so good as a product that modders are like, hey, we want to let more people who are interested play this game, so here's a way to do it. So even though
That's
they are still making games for their target audience, because they did so well, people are just getting in anyway. They're still getting people who aren't their target audience as far as challenge goes, and they're playing a game and they're having fun. So that's ultimately what's the most important.
I think that's such an insightful design concept for anyone out there to look at the modder community. Look at the game and then look at the mods. And it doesn't mean you need to necessarily change the game, but it will give you that hint of what is an additional feature or component or system or easy, difficulty mode that people are creating around the product that's been created. And that would give you a hint and an additional set of feedback on what your audience would like to do, or at least some segment of an audience, or maybe a different audience that then could be added in.
Yeah.
I never thought to sort of look at the top mod and think about it from the perspective of how can I learn from that to change my game in either the next update or the next version, etc.
Yeah, I mean, Divinity Original Sin 2, it's also, I mean, they have a huge mod community, but you can see that they also learned from some of the player behavior, which is just smart to look at player behavior and the things that people wanted. And it shows in that Divinity Original Sin 2 is also one of the funnest experiences of a game that you play. You can just lose so much time in it because there's just so many things to do, and every time you play it again, it's just fun. It's just interesting. You missed something. So yeah.
Right. All right. As we look to sort of close out here, one thing I don't want to miss out on is what advice you might have, and I know you're really good at this, is what advice you might have for anyone else either getting into the game industry in general or wanting to become a game designer in particular.
I mean, ultimately, never give up. Like if you have an idea, if you're passionate about it, then you should, like I say, like always move forward. You have to be willing to, get in on the ground floor. I came in like literally at zero. I'm ex-Navy. I was electronics technician. I just played games. I had no idea that I would, make a career out of making video games. So that just comes out of drive and passion. And just don't be close-minded. Don't let your ego take over. Everyone is there for the same thing. Just get into, try to find a little studio, try to find some people that of like mind, and just create something. With the availability of these engines for no cost, you go to meetups, things like that. Like there's just so much information that I did not have, and I wish that I would have had. Just like use the internet, use Steam, look at games, play a variety of games, and just like, I don't know, don't be afraid to try something. Don't be afraid to apply for a position. You never know what you might get. Get into interviews, talk to people, find out what the industry wants.
And that's huge.
Yeah.
And people probably underestimate that.
Yeah.
Just start talking to people, make those connections,
Yep.
Learn about all these different roles. Learn what a producer does. Learn what a designer does. Learn what a coder does. Learn what a tester does, and look at your strengths and jump into one of those positions potentially, and then see where you go from there.
Yeah.
I've known community managers that have become producers. I've known producers that have become designers, or vice versa. I think
good. Sorry.
Just get into it and then go. Yeah.
I will say, like, to your point, one thing I learned a long time ago is that the ability to speak artist, to speak coder, to speak producer is actually pretty important. It doesn't mean that you have to be those people or those disciplines, but like understanding how to communicate with them is pretty key. And at some point, I realized that when I write a design document, I write it in triplicate effectively, because I'll write, this is a general stealth concept, and here is a stealth system. here it is written from a designer point of view. Here is basically the same system written in production speak. Here is the same system written in art speak. Like it is valuable to go through that process, because when you're having multiple people look at a document, even if you've talked to them a bunch, there is going to be something lost in translation there. But when they can reference this thing and they can understand the parts that are important to them, at least, it is very valuable. So I ended up taking some programming classes and stuff like that, so that I could just like understanding logic and stuff is just useful, but being able to have a coder just paste some code to me, be able to like understand it to an extent.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, well, I can see why this is not working, or why this works this way. They can appreciate that versus them having to now translate to the lesser people,
or
to the
or them not being as good of a communicator,
Yeah.
and you needing to take it when you can take that burden on yourself. It allows you to interact with a whole bunch more people and
Yes, that is the
help
other thing.
them even be more effective.
And that definitely helps with networking and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it is something I learned a long time ago, and something that I try to do as much as humanly possible. Of course, like I said, you're writing a document effectively in triplicate in some cases, and a big document can become a bigger document. But yeah, like it is useful to be able to speak those languages, and it definitely will help you just in design. If you can speak that way, that means you kind of think that way, and it just kind of refines how you approach crafting a concept and a design. It's not just from a designer point of view at that point. It is from all points of view as best as you can do. And it definitely makes moving forward, getting started, a little bit easier.
That's brilliant. There's a certain vocabulary to each of the disciplines, the sub-disciplines in any field.
Yeah.
Definitely in game design, the sound designers will have a vocabulary, the way they talk about the creation of the sound environment and the music and put those.
Yeah.
The artist will have a vocabulary. Learning those vocabularies and being able to speak in their language within that vocabulary, I think is amazing. That's a great tip. And as you said, use the internet. You mentioned Jason, and I think his podcast and his videos are amazing in relaying that vocabulary even down to a really low level of developer.
Mm-hmm.
And what the tools are and what the language is, and when we say we're doing this thing to create a mechanic or an environment or code something from the ground up, this is what it means when we use this kind of term. I think that's a great opportunity, is to go after the the internet is amazing. This is not insightful.
It can be other things if you're not careful, but
yes.
One other thing that I would
but
say,
it is amazing.
One other thing I would say is, one key thing that I also learned a long time ago is never be afraid to ask a question. If you don't understand something, that doesn't mean you're dumb. And you can't let someone assume that you know how something works, because then you'll be in a situation where you're working on something and you have no idea what to do. So like, you should never be afraid to speak up. You should never be afraid to raise your hand. The worst that can happen is that you just walk away and you still understand. Because either they couldn't explain it right, or they weren't very
didn't understand the question,
or they just decided to be mean and call you a dummy, at which point you should probably consider maybe like looking somewhere else.
The internet again.
But yeah, I mean, you should never be afraid. Like, you have an expert there. You should ask the expert the question, especially if they're a more senior person. That's like kind of their job, is to mentor and help. So yeah, you should never, ever be afraid to ask a question, and you should never feel stupid asking a question or asking someone to, basically like break something down a little bit better or clarify it.
That's great advice. if you get a negative response when you ask a question, usually it's because there's some other kind of interference going on. The person's busy or they've got something else to do.
Yeah.
Innately, people love, especially designers, technical people, creators. They love to explain. You feel good explaining. It reinforces your own knowledge. It reinforces your feeling of being an expert in your discipline. And more often we've found today in pop culture, people are criticized for over explaining in their daily life than they are in not explaining or staying out of the conversation. So take advantage of that. People love to explain. So don't be afraid to allow them to do that, and then for you to be able to soak up all of that knowledge and understanding as a result. I think that's great. Okay, final question. Work aside, job aside, we know you play games for fun. Anything else you do for fun, or what's your favorite game right now, or what what's fun for Salim right now?
I mean, I'm outside of work, I am a comic collector. Somehow I've continued to do that for a while. I stopped for a couple of years, but now I'm back into it, and the collection is getting larger and larger. Outside of that, I generally just relax. I'm a pretty laid back person. When I am not thinking about work, I am generally playing a game or running or working out or something like that.
You're a pretty laid back person. You only get up at 5 a.m. and work for 14
till
hours a day.
6:30.
I take breaks in between there. I go on a hike every now and again. If I'm in Texas with where I stay with my friend and his family, hang out with my nieces and the pups and stuff like that. My wife recently, we got into trying to get into archery, which has always been interesting. Interesting concept to me to get into.
Like real life combat design. How do I make the arrow go there?
Understanding how this works. Also, I like to bowl as well, which recently have been actively doing that more. My wrist is unhappy, but you'll have to deal with that. And I also like to play
that comes and
basketball.
goes. That comes and goes in popularity, but never goes away. And sometimes it grows in popularity. I remember, I guess it was a few years back, maybe about 5 or 6, the proliferation of the big bowling alleys with the food and the all that kind of, again, a new bowling experience.
But yeah, I'm pretty laid back. When I'm out for the day, I just the NBA playoffs are on. I'm watching the playoffs and playing a game or something. Reading a comic or something. I tend to just chill every once a month. There's a game night with buds, and that's about it. Play D&D here and there, and I just like to relax.
Well, that sounds good, and I really like the idea of what are people doing on the outside of their day job, because that also adds to the inspiration. And, get your mind on something else or experience something new like archery, and that does inspire interesting things back in your professional life.
It definitely helped me solve some problems that were driving me nuts when my brain decided to not focus on it. So it definitely helps.
All right. Well, this has been amazing, and as I know it would be.
Thank you so much for your time.
I'm not sure it's been amazing.
Inspirational.
It's been fun for me for sure. I'm not sure if it's been amazing for you guys.
It has. No, it definitely has, and I knew it would be. We had sort of followed you for a little while and watched you, and we're really excited to get you on as our first episode of this new series. I think this really sets the bar for the kind of experience we want to give to people that would be listening in, to learn about a role, to learn about really what it takes, and to learn more about the games industry.
So much pressure.
So really appreciate it.
I might need a re-record. So much pressure.
Well, thank you. So I know I want to stay connected to you. If other people want to reach out and talk about games or learn more about the games industry, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Look under Salim Grant. Should be pretty easy to find. I think I'm probably the only designer on there with that name. And you can, my other contact information, I think you can get through there. So
excellent. Again, thanks. And we will talk to you soon again sometime.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to it.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.